So the first thing that I'm going to do is put the paint down and talk about the colors that I use. The palette that I'm using is essentially the color layout that my father taught me. He was a portrait painter who studied at the National Academy of Design in 1920. And he laid out a palette like this. He had some famous teachers there, like Hawthorne. My father would paint with this palette, and this is essentially what I'm using now. Over the years, I've changed colors. And I also want to say that different artists use different arrangements of colors. Some even use only 4 colors, but I tend to use the full palette that I have been using for a long time. So now I'm going to look at the model, and I often measure to see the distances from top to bottom. So I'm going to use a little of the alizarin crimson and viridian green. Now, a lot of these mixtures are mixtures that most times people don't think of right away. And it takes, usually a lot of experience to get an idea of what the colors are going to do. See, now right now that's a little too dull. It's got to be a little sharper. I'm going to put in some of the ultramarine blue along with the cadmium red. Now the upper part of this lip tends to be a little more reddish. That's the nature of it, and it gives it more of a lifelike feel. There's also a slight, I'm getting to real detail now, I shouldn't. There's a slight feel of a bit of a light highlight on the lower lip here before it meets the upper one in this section over here. Let me see if I can get that in. You see, these various little touches is what gives the expression, for example, that she has in her mouth, that you can't get any other way unless you observe these things, these little subtleties. There's a bit of a shade coming down here. And I'm going to try and get that in. And then it comes from this cast shadow, it comes around like that. And over here I see a little bit of a streak. And you see how I've got the hair, the form of it, the darks going across the grain. Every now and then you might want to put in a tone of a light that's coming in, but that's a little too light. I'm going to have to darken that. You see, you don't want it to jump out of place. It's got to be in relation to the rest of the painting.